Everyone. I'm Joe Riley, Development Director from Seattle Subway, and thank you all for being here and participating in today's event, Our Rapid Transit Future. We at Seattle Subway are proud to host this event to support re-electing Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda. Seattle Subway is an all-volunteer nonprofit that advocates for fully connecting all Seattle neighborhood centers and the region at large by expanding our fast, reliable, high-capacity, renewably powered, and grade-separated Link Light Rail system. Tonight, we look forward to discuss bold visions for an equitable transit and mobility plan for Seattle. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what Seattle Subway is focused on this year. And for that, we're going to turn to Jonathan Hopkins, our political director. Jonathan?
Well, even as I start this out, I'm going to talk about how great Teresa is and start with that and move into a little bit of how that applies to our vision. The reason we're supporting Teresa Mosqueda this year is because we need visionary leadership that's going to be required to deal with all the really hard things we have ahead of our city in the coming years. And in her past term in council, Teresa's demonstrated she already has that. Whether it's supporting a very, very robust STBD expansion or seeking to tackle the piecemeal way we build out transit in our region, she's the type of leader we need, and we need more of. We need 8 Teresas, 9 Teresas, many, many Teresas in our city, because this is a really challenging time. While we're focused on transportation today, Teresa's more than just a transit champion. Though that's what we love her for, she's also fighting for other things we love her for. Workers who make a living wage, helping us get an economy back on track post-COVID, and working to build a housed and affordable Seattle. All of these things go together in an essential way, and we actually can't have a greater city without doing them all. Not just one, not just two, but all of them. And then when it comes down to the stuff that we get really, really excited about, and that is like building out a transit system that we do think is a key piece of equity, I'm showing you hopefully a really pretty map, something that Seattle Subway is known for, of what our vision for a really truly connected Seattle looks like on the left. And on the right, you'll find what the Paris Metro looks like. Like we sometimes in our internal discussions say if we could just have like the density and transit of Paris and the housing solutions of Vienna and like the integration of Hong Kong of those two together, like we would have a truly great city that solves so many of the things that Teresa's working on. So you can see, and we're gonna have a little poll about what lines you like best a little bit later of this map that we've been circulating and updating through the last few years, and our push on S23 helped part of this become a reality. The next couple of years will be pretty decisive though. All of these pretty lines that you see on this map, if they leave out of downtown, they will be absolutely impossible if we don't do this right in the next couple of years. Sound Transit's building a tunnel in downtown that might forbid any of those things from ever being added in a cost-effective way. And we know we need an equitable, connected community where essential workers and everybody can ride transit and support a great city. So that is one of the areas that we are going to be working on over the next couple of years. And again, if we mess it up, we end up choosing prematurely to forbid any of these lines from ever getting built. So a little of that might come up in the questions. Overall, visionary leadership that has long-term thinking is required. Thankfully, Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda has that, hopefully for another 4 years. And so with that, I'll hand it back to the team.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. We would like to start things off with a poll for all of you, our audience. We can get that started. Awesome. So our question for all of you, which Seattle Subway proposed expansion line most excites you, and which would you think would best benefit Seattle? And Jonathan will pull up our map here. We're curious to hear what your thoughts are. We have a number of options. You'll notice on the map, we have a pink line, which is a north-south line following Aurora Avenue and State Route 99 through downtown that branches off eastward to First Hill and down the Madison corridor. We have the gold line, a central line circling the waterfront, Belltown, Denny Triangle, Capitol Hill, and the Central District down to the Rainier Valley. We also have the purple line, east and west line from Sandpoint, U District, Wallingford, and Ballard, then south through downtown to Georgetown, South Park, and SeaTac Airport. We also have the green line, Ballard, Crown Hill, and Greenwood through Northgate to Lake City, and northeast Lake Washington towards Kenmore and Bothell. We also have the red line, an extension south from West Seattle Junction to White Center, then eastward to Burien, South Center, and Renton, And finally, I don't think expanding light rail beyond ST3 is an important priority. It is also an option for you to select. We will go over the results from this poll at the end of our conversation today.
Do we want to give folks 64% have voted. Okay, we're almost there.
Awesome.
All right, we'll give just one more second.
Almost everybody.
Almost everybody. Okay,
We will share all of your responses later on when we open our discussion to questions from the audience. This also means that if you do have questions at any time, please do type them into the question and answer section, and we will ask some of those questions after our main questions for the panel. How do we think we're doing on our vote? It looks like the poll is closed.
We got, yes. Do you want me to share the results?
Sure, why not?
Okay.
Okay, it looks like the most popular line was the gold line, which was that central line circling the waterfront, Belltown, Denny Triangle, and Capitol Hill, going through the Central District down to the Rainier Valley. Next, the line of second interest would be the purple line, which does provide an essential east-west connection from Sandpoint, U District, Wallingford, and Ballard, through downtown, through Georgetown, South Park, and the airport. And then looks like the pink line, that north-south one running along Aurora, First Hill, and Madison corridor. And not least, the green line is also have been voted for. Next, and then the red line extension. And we do have no one who thinks that expanding light rail beyond ST3 is unimportant. So very interesting. Thank you so much for providing your responses. Love that. All right, let's move on. And without further ado, let's introduce tonight's panel. So first and foremost, we are so lucky to be in the presence of City Council member Teresa Mosqueda as we wholeheartedly support her upcoming re-election to Seattle City Council. First elected to Seattle City Council in 2017, Councilmember Mosqueda has worked to make Seattle a more equitable place to live. She's brought together labor, business, housing, transportation, racial equity, and environmental justice advocates to pass the Jumpstart Seattle Progressive Revenue Plan, as well as COVID relief in 2020, and made a strong point to fight for workers and for living wages. Mosqueda is a strong transit supporter who most recently pushed to renew and increase the Seattle Transit Benefit District in 2020. She is a strong, consistent voice for equity and sustainability and has expressed great desire to be a progressive leader in the marriage of transit, mobility, and affordable housing. Thank you so much for being here, Council Member.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight with Seattle Subway and all of the friends that we see online. There are so many people here today. I just really appreciate the opportunity to join you virtually. I see community leaders like Chakundi, who's going to be on the panel, labor leaders like Nicole Grant, who I'm so very excited to have on this panel presentation with Seattle Subway, leading the Martin Luther King County Labor Council. I see friends like Logan, longtime transit and urbanist advocate. Logan, it's really good to see you. I saw you pop on video earlier. I can't wait to get back into the community when it's all safe and for all of us to get together and be in one place again and to be able to celebrate and brainstorm as well. And I say brainstorm because part of what excites me about this conversation tonight and part of the reason that I'm running again for Seattle City Council is to think about what we need to do to actually create thriving, resilient local economies. But when I say local economies, I also mean the infrastructure and improvements that we need to build cities, walkable cities, livable cities, cities that have transit options. There's Sejal Parikh, who's on my team. She's my chief of staff, and we keep having this conversation. What is going to continue to draw people to our cities, our great cities that have restaurants and fun bars and arts and culture and parks and places to swim in our city of Seattle? This is a thriving place, but what if people don't return to work in the physical presence in an office building downtown? What if their child care center that they found in their local neighborhood or even more affordably outside of the city of Seattle is a more stable option for them? What's going to attract them to want to be in the city of Seattle? And the answer, I think, is that 10 to 15 minute radius that we all think about when we think about what do we need in our surroundings. I want us to have a city where we can walk and we can bike and we can scooter and we can get on the subway, we can get around town without having to have a car, not stuck in traffic, not stuck in neighborhoods that don't have access to parks or childcare centers or arts and cultural opportunities. When we think about the opportunity to marry transit priorities and housing priorities and marry those with arts and culture and supporting our small entrepreneurs like women and minority owned businesses, restaurants and bars, and getting people out when it's healthy to do so and interacting, that's what a city looks like. And other cities have the infrastructure already in place to fall back on. That image of Paris superimposed over Seattle is what it should look like to have access to high opportunity areas in the city, no matter where you live. You should be able to get on a subway and get to a park or the zoo or to the waterfront or to childcare or senior center or a grocery store. So that's why I want to come back and work with all of you. And I am so excited about the early endorsement of Seattle Subway, because this is part of what makes cities work. This is part of what attracts people to cities, the ability to be mobile and have access to high opportunity, diversity, culture, and educational opportunities and good living wage jobs. I'm really proud of the work that we've done with all of you over the past 4 years, to have had Seattle Subway's support 4 years ago, and many of the improvements that we've made. I mean, look at last year's budget. Every single priority from the Mass Coalition, the coalition focused on moving people instead of cars, was funded. That's more bike lanes, protected bike lanes. That's more sidewalks in neighborhoods that never had them. That's more greenways with paths that connect people to neighborhood economic hubs. And we did things like the Jumpstart Progressive Revenue, which includes 2/3 of the funding for housing and human services, sheltering those who are unsheltered. And the rest of the funding, economic development, resiliency, and Green New Deal investments. That's how we create the economy of the future. And investments in transit options like subways is part of what is the Green New Deal solutions that we should be investing in. We've done so much in terms of labor protections, and some of that is with the folks who provide critical services on our transit lines. Making sure that these are good living wage jobs is something that I'm committed to, as well as making sure people who need to get to their jobs have access to regular transit options, and that when they're on the bus or the subway, they are able to get to a job that actually pays them and respects them. We passed hazard pay for grocery workers. We passed sick leave for gig workers, guaranteed rest breaks, and guaranteed minimum wage for Lyft and Uber drivers, hopefully doing that last mile to get folks to transit options. We've passed labor protections for hotel workers and for domestic workers' Bill of Rights, all of which was just upheld in the court in the last week in terms of grocery store workers and hotel worker healthcare benefits. We are breaking ground in so many ways. And what we see in front of us in terms of the crisis playing out in the street is a manifestation of the inequity and instability that was already there prior to COVID. So I'm compelled to come back and address these issues with urgency, with integrity, with, I think, the fierceness that is needed to tackle these inequities, and to do it by bringing people to the table, diverse perspectives, and seeing the intersectionality of all of these issues that we care about. Transit options, urbanist development, creating a more livable, walkable Seattle is the intersection where we can create a more just society that has more access to opportunity and true stability so that we can weather future storms. So I'm really thankful for the support that you all have provided, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to sit at tables with you, Seattle Subway, and the folks who are on the line to help identify the ways in which the injustices that we see, whether it relates to supporting small businesses and our lowest wage workers, whether it's making sure that folks have access to childcare, or as childcare providers that they're getting paid a good living wage, whether it's addressing head on the racist covenants that are still in our zoning policies that preclude people from living in the city, and 85% of the city's land that is zoned for single family use, that is based in exclusionary zoning policies that need to be addressed head on. And we're doing work on that now, have set the stage to do that with the racial equity toolkit that we demanded 2 years ago. A report is forthcoming. As we think about what creates a more equitable city, creating access to housing is key. You cannot stay home to stay healthy if you don't have a home. And we cannot address the overflowing numbers of people in our shelters if there is not an exit plan for those folks to get into stable housing. And finally, as we think about the call to respond to this moment of crisis, the call to not return to a normal that we knew before and to actually create a new normal and more equitable local economy, that means also making sure that it's equitable and livable. Livable in the sense that folks have transit, they have sidewalks, they have bike lanes, and livable in the sense that we address over policing that is leading to people dying at the hands of police, and wanting to make sure that we see the intersectionality for how we can invest dollars into upstream services so that people have support, they have housing, they have childcare, they have safe streets. And we're addressing the need to make sure that our officers are not being asked to be case managers and mental health counselors. That's what I think it means to have a livable, equitable city going forward. And I really think that the work that Seattle Subway has done to help make sure more people can live in the city, more people can affordably live here, and more people can equitably access high opportunity neighborhoods is the center stone for how we create greater stability going forward and greater equity. So it's a thrill to be here. And I know we have serious issues in front of us, and I look forward to working with you and working on these issues through the intersectional lens that it demands. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Councilmember. Next, we are grateful for the attendance of our esteemed panelists, Chikundi Salisbury and Nicole Grant. Chikundi Salisbury, long-term Seattle activist, is the founder of 3 nonprofit organizations: Youth Green Court, focused on youth engagement in the environmental movement; 100 Black Parents, focused on engaging adults in education and providing collegiate scholarships to Black youth; and Herb Vote, focused on community empowerment through voter engagement. Salisbury recently ran for the legislature with a platform that included strong support of climate policies, including a carbon tax, taxing polluters, and doing more to reduce solid waste. Welcome, Mr. Salisbury. We are also grateful for the attendance of esteemed panelist Nicole Grant. Grant was elected to serve as Executive Secretary Treasurer of MLK Labor in October 2015, the first woman to lead King County Labor Council in its 130-year history. Her mission is to build power for all workers and grow the labor movement. Nicole is a journeyman electrician with IBEW 46, where she also served as the Executive Director of the Certified Electrical Workers of Washington. She has worked to make sure working families have captured the historic growth of the Puget Sound economy. She believes that unions are for everyone and has invested in organizing to grow and steer our local labor movement toward a vision of racial, gender, and LGBTQ equity. Welcome, Ms. Grant. And so without further ado, let's begin our discussion. We'd like to start things off by hearing from each of you. What makes good transit, and how does good transit change a city? Perhaps we'll start with you, Councilmember Mosqueda.
Okay, and I saw Chikundi and Nicole off mute, so I'll be very short. I think reliable transit to all neighborhoods. That means reliable options for people to have on-time service. And I would like us to have a system that allows for that transit service to not be reliant on fares from people who need to ride the bus, to ride the subway. There are ways that we can structure revenue to make sure that our transit system has that reliable revenue. And ideally, it would be wonderful to have an Orca for all so that people can jump on that transit whenever they need to get to their place of employment, their childcare, or just to interact with our city and have greater self-determination and independence without having to need a car.
Whichever of you guys would like to go next, look forward to hear from you.
Well, if we're in ladies first mode, I will jump in, though I'm dying to hear what Chikundi has to say. Okay, so we have a saying in the labor movement, and that is that nothing is too good for the working class. And when I think about what's good transit in that context, I immediately think about the only junket that I've ever been on. I got to go to Stockholm on a congestion pricing policy tour that Bloomberg sent a bunch of people on. And it was a big deal for me because I'd never done anything like that before. But we get to Stockholm, Sweden, and immediately when you catch the subway that takes you from the airport to the real subway, it was like suede seats and brushed steel fittings. It was so elegant and so fine and public and affordable. And then you get to the real subway system, the main urban subway system in Stockholm. And every station had an artistic theme that was totally immersive. Like the gay pride one was just like rainbows for miles. And this system is blasted out of stone and it looked super cool. When you get out of the subway, they have a ferry system that is also public, is also super affordable, barely not free, that navigates the entire city where you can jump on a ferry and get from neighborhood to neighborhood. And when I experienced that, I was like, it's true. Nothing's too good for the working class. And it made me feel really good to see just like 1 million people use it every day. There's no reason we can't have that. They don't even have a Jeff Bezos in Stockholm. We're drowning in money and we don't have any of the stuff we actually need.
Wow. Yeah, I need to go to Stockholm and visit one of these days. So, to me, what makes great transit is the marriage of affordability and reliability and the how fast you can get places and go places and how that ties in with your life. Which is, obviously, I know it's a bigger conversation, but Councilmember Mosqueda talked about, the economic and social development of community, right? That transportation is just one part of it, right? But what good does it have to have, transportation if you're just catching it to your 3 jobs, right? So you can kind of even stay afloat. So, I just would say that it's ultimately always going to be tied to the, economic, status or the ability of community. But that is a deeper conversation just to try to answer the question. Again, I would just say that it's a function of how fast we can get places in having the least amount of barriers to get there. And some examples of that. One, I'm leaning towards free public transportation. I love what they've done in Kansas City. And obviously I'm not a transit professional, so I haven't been out to visit Kansas City or talk to them about how that's going. But I did love the fact that that they say, hey, we're just going to make the bus free, because as we all know, there is a lot of disparity amongst how people are treated on the bus and transit, depending on the color of your skin and and where you fall in socially and economically. So if we had a free system, that most certainly would make people feel better. And then secondarily, I also, again, think that it's a good transit system gets people where they need to go in the fastest amount of time so they can do what they need to do. Last year, I talked to several neighbors and we talked about, what's going to get somebody out of their car to go visit Seward Park, right? And I did the math on that. So if you live in New Holly and you've got, maybe you don't have an electric car, right? You've got a 79 Oldsmobile, right? And you want to go down and recreate with your family, you want to take a walk around the loop, it's going to take you almost an hour to catch the bus from New Holly up to Alaska Street, transfer from the 36 onto a different bus that will take you down to Seward Park, right? And you could drive from New Holly to Seward Park in about 8 minutes in your 79 Oldsmobile, right? So it's a hard sell to tell somebody who's working 2 jobs, right, that I have this 3-hour window and I want to go walk around the park with my kid, to spend 2 of those 3 hours getting to and from Seward Park, which is 8 minutes away, in my beater car, right? So, you know, again, good transportation to me, one, again, is free or very low cost for folks because it's low barrier. And then 2, it makes sense for people to be able to get to where they need to go, not only just to work, right, where you have to go, but where you want to go, right, and recreation and to parks and those types of things. So those are the things to me that make up good transportation.
Agreed.
Great responses, everyone. We could move on to our next question unless anyone has additional thoughts on that question. Hear nothing, let's move on to our next question. Is Sound Transit 3 the last major rail investment that we should make in Seattle? What do you see as the next steps for a more connected Seattle?
Kundi, you're off mute if you want to go first.
Well, you know, I don't know. You know, I love the subway map, the piece that we saw earlier. Obviously, prior to that, I kind of liked the ST3 map, to tell the truth. But seeing all these different options, they did sound great, right? So, you know, I'd love to see an extension of rail that's not currently on ST3 to go from, you know, South Seattle there to Renton and possibly Kent and those kinds of places, because I know the density of those places. So, you know, I guess, you know, to me, that's kind of, once you see the map that you presented at the beginning of this meeting, I think that, you know, the answer to that is probably no, that we will need to expand, you know, these last major rail investment. And then, of course, I think that in addition to the ST3 current map, there's so many places where we could use an additional station, like, and I know that the Graham station is on that map, but there's other places that that we, you know, we didn't know what we didn't know. And now, you know, we know more and we see where people would like to catch the train. And so, yeah, I think that there'll be significantly, you know, there's going to be more investment as we go, move forward.
Nicole, do you want to take that?
Yeah, love that. I mean, by the time Sound Transit 3 is over, I feel like we'll still have just finished like the first round. Like when I look at a place, you know, a place that's not here, a place like New York or London or anywhere, you can tell that it just, you know, people get a taste and they like it and it just keeps coming. And the West Coast, you know, we don't have a lot of super strong examples. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think San Francisco has like the most sophisticated situation with the trolley bus and the Muni and the BART and the Caltrain. You know, to me, I'm like, okay, well, ST3 is the BART. Let's talk about that Muni and that Caltrain and whatever's next. I want more kinds that go, I mean, Shikandi really said it, just like to the places. I want to be able to get from point A to point B. And Sound Transit 3 is just not enough to be able to do that. I'm for it. It's a good start.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. I mean, good start, and thanks to the community who helped rally to make sure that it passed, and to the labor community as well, who made sure that this was, you know, an opportunity for good living wage jobs. And I think, Shikandi, you mentioned some of the ways in which we didn't know what we didn't know. We also know that when some of the initial lines were laid, there wasn't enough outreach to do with some of the smallest businesses who are along those corridors who needed help staying open during this long period of construction. We now know that there's ways for us to mitigate that. And here right now, I think we can marry what we didn't know then and what we know now, marry the fact that we know that the vast majority of Seattle voters want Sound Transit 3, and marry now that we have a federal partner who is willing to invest in the ways that we haven't seen over the last 4 years, but even for the last few decades prior to that. Let's do what we need to do to create a new wave of investments in infrastructure. And that includes in transit options. Let's make sure that we're front loading investment strategies from the federal partners, ideally with state, local, and regional partners as well, to create a massive infrastructure investment plan. Let this be our new deal. Let this be our Green New Deal. Let this be how we put people to work who especially were impacted by the loss of jobs from this last recession that wasn't caused by COVID, the instability not caused by COVID, but made worse. And who was predominantly impacted? Low wage, women, people of color, and immigrants. So let's create that pathway to greater stability, economic opportunity, good living wage union jobs in building that next rail and the next bullet train. I went to Kobe when my dad was on exchange. He teaches at Evergreen State College, professor of political economy and social change. I don't know how I got, so passionate about the work that I do, but he was on exchange in Kobe. And I went there, got off the airport, went into the train, like Nicole said, got to their house, which was a block away from the apartment they were staying at. And we went to visit places like Hiroshima on the bullet train. Within 45 minutes, a trip that would take us here in the US, 2 hours, 3 hours because of traffic. Let's have an actual regional connection that includes bullet trains, that includes expansion of ST3. Let's include the subway in Seattle and think broadly about how this can be the opportunity to reset what infrastructure investments should be. Hopefully it's the tip of the iceberg.
Wonderful. Well, let's move on to our next question, perhaps. Is there a way to build both great, equitable transit systems while also reversing gentrification? We always talk about reducing gentrification, but how can we potentially reverse it and give more transit access to everyone? Perhaps Nicole would like to start?
Okay, when I think about reducing or reversing gentrification, I just immediately think of Yesler Terrace and what not to do. It's like there was this neighborhood that was a fine neighborhood, a long-standing neighborhood, public, integrated, and it used to go to a streetcar, and it still leaves on a trolley bus and a streetcar again. And the city of Seattle sold Yesler Terrace for $20 million to Vulcan. And it's just like, I think it's like, what's the opposite of something like that happening? I mean, maybe it's time for high density, very low income workforce housing in Madison Park. I mean, I saw the proposed future Madison Park line on the map there at the beginning when we did the poll. And I think like we need to be able to have low income housing that's public, and it has to be transit connected. And the enemy of that ultimately is the single family neighborhood, in its very worst expression. It's the gated communities of Broadmoor and Windermere, Blue Ridge, places like that. That should go away immediately. Gates gone. No more private beaches. No more private tennis club, golf course. It's time to have low income housing. That's what we actually need. And on the transit.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really tough question, but I guess what I would say, that obviously I think the answer is yes, we could get to it, but we really have to look at some of the systemic policies that are harmful to African Americans and other people of color, in community, especially as we look, if you look at that overlay of Paris over Seattle, much of that overlay was in the traditional African-American community, which we all know that has been gentrified. And we know that it was systemic, right? We know that from House Bill, 1918, where we talked about, the city of Seattle had policies in place that helped usher out African Americans, right? And so, of course, I think we can most certainly have equitable transit, not only through increased rail, subways and the like you've been talking about, but increased rapid rides and other types of transportation in communities. But we have to look at some of these policies that continue to disenfranchise Black people. Right. And so, one of those things that I'm talking to people about, lots of conversation is about having the city of Seattle establish a thing called a legacy homeowner. Right. If you've lived in your home for over X amount of years, we can decide. Right. There ought to be some type of exemption to some of these the MHA. Right. So the MHA and some of these other fees, they really impede different folks from being able to improve their property and thus densify the neighborhood as it is, right? So we most certainly have lots of single housing, family housing, but as you look at some of the codes and the like, and the barriers, if you will, that impede community from being able to build on their property, improve it so they can be able to bring family back home. There's a lot of people that would love to put an ADU in their backyard, however, they are higher than the AMA, but because of their, and that means, the AMI, I'm sorry, the average medium income for folks that might know what that means. But at the end of the day, they don't fit into the neat box of low income. Right, because one of the things I was talking to the Department of Housing about is that oftentimes in the Black community, and I'm sure in other communities as well, is that we don't necessarily have access to the capital and to the credit to be able to improve our property, right? And so sometimes, and a lot of times in these communities, these people are the bank, if you will, for their family because they don't have the family members to go and borrow. You can't go to Uncle Frank, right? They can't necessarily go to the bank, right? So you have lots of families that are going into the equity of the home. And so, yeah, maybe the home is worth a lot, right? Because it's in Seattle, but they could be leveraged all the way out. And so they cannot get the money together to come up with the soft costs that it takes to even begin to improve their property, to have additional family members in the house. So that's a really deep rabbit hole. I'm just kind of putting it out there that there are some things where we can keep people in their homes, right, that would like to stay, but cannot afford some of the, like I said, the MHA and different fees that are impeding that type of work that would halt this march of gentrification. And then also, Seattle, at the end of the day, for us to have to reduce gentrification, we are going to need other parts of Seattle, not just Southeast Seattle, to embrace multi-story housing, right? And it cannot just be workforce housing, right? Because that's the key. Like, and no disrespect to Nicole, like she said, hey, let's get workforce housing. What about families, and people that make they make good money and they want to come and live right in the city? We want to be able to have a variety of housing options for folks that are close to this transit, and it can't just be along Rainier Avenue, right? It needs to be, in Wallingford, it needs to be in Fremont, it needs to be in Laurelhurst, it needs to be in Magnolia, it needs to be across the city. And honestly, there's some pushback, as I think many people on this call probably are aware of, that everybody's great with densifying, Southeast Seattle. Let's build more apartments at White Center, right? Roxbury, right? And there's all the, so again, we could talk a lot about that, but I would just say that there is a pathway, I think, to having additional transit and great transit, and also reducing the march, if you will, of gentrification, the wave that is, crashing across Southeast Seattle and South Seattle in general. And that's through, some of the things I mentioned. And then lastly, just really the rest of Seattle kind of looking in the mirror and saying, hey, we've got to add capacity to our neighborhood too. It's not just let's gentrify the rest of Southeast Seattle. Let's kind of, get people cheated out of their homes through, predatory lending, and folks don't know what their property's worth. So there's a lot of work to be done there. But we have to, and what I would say is that, what I would like to see from the transit community, right, is that we have to do both. And as we talk about, for example, we had this great map and it talks about, hey, look at all these great lines that could be here. We also have to be on the front end of the outreach and the front end of talking to people, because the speculators see that and they said, okay, well, let's go door knock and see whose house we can buy, who we could trick out of their house, because we know that, hey, Seattle Subway's pushing for this, these new lines, right? So whose job is it if we're going to advocate for these new lines? There has to be some advocacy to protect these people that we know will get tricked out of their homes, tricked out of their, their family, the resources and any type of generational wealth that they may have. So yes, there's a pathway forward, but I just think that it's both and. We can't just say let's have this great transportation. We have to worry about the collateral community damage that will come from this excellent plan that's out there.
I'll just add a little bit because I think that both of those answers were incredibly powerful. When I started working on transit and housing issues, one of the things I really tried to center my conversations on was the fact that the language that is used is often very exclusionary. Let's start with that, right? You talk about transit lines and some of the transit terminology. If people don't have a history with it, what I think people hear is, this is going to mean another freeway through my community. This is going to mean public policy drafted without me at the table, because that's been the lived experience of so many people in transit policy and also in housing policy. And I say that in the past with a hopeful note that I hope in the last 5 years, there has been a different lived experience, but that's the reality. That's the history of our city and so many cities across this country. I went to Detroit and saw the heart of their downtown that was run by African-American community entrepreneurs that was completely bulldozed for their new freeway system. The same thing is true if you look at what happened across our own city, especially in the South End, as new freeway lines went in. So when folks think of transit policy, they're probably thinking back to some of those lived experiences of transit and new transit options yielding displacement. I think it's important to start with that. And then when you think about housing, that's been some of the same lived experience, especially if the terminology sort of turns people off. When we talk about housing and we just talk about AMI or FAR and we start throwing these acronyms and abbreviations around, if we're not talking about inclusionary housing, affordable housing done through the lens of the community that has been most at risk of displacement and harmed by previous redlining policies and displacement, intentional displacement strategies, and folks aren't at the table to right those historic wrongs, then I can totally understand why people would be a no to new transit lines and a no to new development. And what I have been really trying to help do with the terminology and the tables that we have been able to be part of over the last 4 years on council is to bring in the very populations that have been most negatively impacted by these public policies in, using public dollars to displace members of our public and our community who are predominantly Black and Brown and who have been excluded from the decision-making table. So starting with that realization that in transit and housing, we unfortunately have a legacy that's in many ways still on the books in housing and has been the lived experience in transit. And then talking about how we can do these things differently and how we must do these things differently going forward to right those historic wrongs. And when I think about the question that you asked, can it be the both and, as Shikundi mentioned, and how fast and quickly can we do it in a way that's inclusionary, like Nicole talked about, I think we can do it if we make sure that we center those conversations on folks who've been disproportionately impacted by displacement and harmed by public policies in the past. And I always lift up El Centro, and I know we have to have more El Centros in the future because we can't just be pointing to one location over and over, but you got El Centro located across the street from the Roberto Maesta Plaza. The transit center there has childcare across the street. It has a plaza for community engagement. It has a community gathering space now. It has small women and minority-owned businesses on the first and second floors. It has affordable housing, and it has family size housing, right? Not just a studio or a one bedroom. It has the ability for families to live in our city's core. That is the vision that I think we all have to be continuing to fight for. And I think it's the vision that we all want to see come to fruition when we talk about transit-oriented development. However, I would note this. I don't want our transit-oriented development to be squeezed into the 15% of the land that has been okayed by current zoning policies to be in these, corridors right now. I want every neighborhood to have access to high opportunity and frequent transit options. I would like us to see this transit options be true transit-oriented development as a philosophy to how we build housing and how we build transit across our city. And I think we can do that by making more of those multifamily structures, more mixed income housing options, more buildings that look like the Roberto Maesta Plaza across our city. If we both address zoning, if we reorient how we think about housing and make it more inclusive and affordable and accessible by changing those zoning policies, but also by making sure that transit is available in every corner of our city. And so that development is inherently transit oriented because we've made transit available to every neighborhood. I wish we could see each other and be no, that doesn't sound right. Because I really look forward to continuing continuing to get your feedback as we think about what the next wave of what's possible looks like to address these issues and to, like I said, right these historic wrongs.
And as we've discussed, there is no issue that is a single issue. Everything is related. Unfortunately, it looks like we are running out of time. We will likely not be able to answer questions from our audience directly. However, we do have 2 great email addresses for you to field your questions to, which we will be able to respond to those questions. To contact Team Teresa, there will be the email address in the chat, info@teamteresa.org. To contact Seattle Subway, feel free to contact us at contact@seattlesubway.org. We would like to move, however, to really get to support Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda's campaign. For those of you who do not know, she is one of, or really the first major candidate to have won an election through the usage of democracy vouchers, which is really quite exciting. And it looks like we have our democracy vouchers out now, which is wonderful. I'm gonna pass this off to Jonathan to lead us through our democracy voucher section of our event tonight.
Well, first, I guess it's clear to everybody why we're so eagerly supportive of Team Teresa. And then one of the best ways you can obviously do that, this is the moment you've all been waiting for to show off your democracy vouchers to everybody. So if you have those in hand, put in the chat, like if you have democracy vouchers you want to give to Team Teresa, and I can give a demonstration of how you can do that. If you've lost yours, like I have, we can also talk through that. So if you are on video, show your democracy vouchers if you can. The best way to turn those in is by mail, and just mail them in. Just make sure you put Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda's name on them and fill them out. If you need replacement vouchers, look in the chat. We'll give you a link to how you can get replacement vouchers in the chat. Again, I've already lost mine somewhere, or you can email Team Teresa at the email address. It's so important that we participate in this council election, so we need your help early to make sure she wins her re-election this year. So let us know in the chat how many democracy vouchers you want to give to Team Teresa. Is it 4? Anybody have 4? Or 3, and you can donate to up to $300 as well. So if you have 4, 3, 2, or 1 democracy voucher, please send it on the way.
Thank you so much.
And then if you do have money to give, I know I just donated $100 today, and I'll be doing more later. So please, but any amount counts, right? We all have different abilities to give. And then just overall, everybody is joining here because you care, and you care about having somebody else in the community that cares and can communicate and provide vision and lead. So that's just the biggest piece. Just thank you for your donations to Team Teresa and for your support here today. And now I'm going to take my train and my smiling face off and hand it back to Joe.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, if we want great transit, it is very essential that we put people in positions of power who will look out for transit issues. And we can do that by supporting Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda for her re-election to Seattle City Council. So this does conclude our presentation for this evening. On behalf of Seattle Subway, I want to give a big thank you to Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda, Community Leader Chikundi Salisbury, and Labor Leader Nicole Grant. Also a big shout out and thanks to everyone who has joined us this evening. Seattle Subway can only be made possible by volunteers like you, and great things happening in our world can only happen when folks like yourselves care. If you haven't already, do stay up to date on Seattle Subway's plans and news by following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also reach us at contact@seattlesubway.org. We will have more events in the future to mobilize folks on upcoming transit things. And of course, as all of you have done tonight, supporting candidates like Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda. And you can reach them again at info@teamteresa.org. Do we have any parting thoughts, Councilmember?
I just want to say thank you. It's so exciting to be here. I remember 4 years ago, we saw each other in person on Capitol Hill, and you had those great displays of what it could be to have a truly integrated, accessible, and frequent subway throughout Seattle. We will keep working with you as we implement ST3, defend it, and make sure that there's more to come as we think about what sort of Green New Deal infrastructure investments are on the way, federal funding plus state plus local dollars. We can make this possible. And I just want to say thanks for all of your support. If you have lost your vouchers or don't know where they're at, don't worry. I did the same thing 4 years ago. I was running for office and I recycled mine and had to pull them out of the recycling the next day because they look like, you know, news about Seattle Public Utilities or something, right? And so I actually had to pull it back out. So we've done a lot of work to try to make sure that more information can get out to folks about democracy vouchers. I'm a huge supporter of these. This is what makes our campaign publicly funded, not beholden to, you know, large corporations. I'm not out there dialing for dollars. We're having these conversations and hopefully one day on the doors talking to more folks in person. But you all power this campaign, and it's just an incredible honor to be here. Thanks to Catherine Bodman from our team for organizing this event and filling the chat with ways to get your replacement vouchers or questions that you might have. I'm always in awe of Nicole Grant every time I get to see her, and not only as a labor leader, but as a mentor in the labor movement. And Chikundi, just incredibly inspired by the work that you've done and continue to do in community. And I hope that everybody does join Seattle Subway because we are stronger together, and we can make these dreams that we talked about possible by working on this intersectionality and pulling our collective power. So thanks for your support in this race, and also want to make sure folks know that we support you too.
Thank you so much, everyone. Hope you all have a great night.